Welcome to the Learning Experience powered by CAST. I'm one of your hosts, Kelly Suding.
And I'm Luis Perez.
And I'm Brian Dean.
We are three educators here ready to break down barriers until learning has no limits. Let's do this.
Hey everybody, it's always one of my favorite episodes when I get to have these conversations with my CAST colleagues. And we have a bunch of them here with us today. So you're in for a treat. You're going to hear from a number of our casties today. And so I want to give them a chance to introduce themselves. So let's go ahead and start with Jenna. Jenna, introduce yourself.
Hi, Luis. This is so exciting to be here with you today. Thank you again for the invitation. I'm the Senior Director for Pre-K-12 Research at CAST. And my research focuses on supporting teachers to learn about UDL and really starting to explore their trajectories as they start to apply UDL to their practice. And I've also been involved with the development of the UDL guidelines since our very first iteration back in 2008. So being a part of the evolution of the guidelines has felt so meaningful to me as part of my work at CAST.
Did y'all hear that, y'all? We're the celebrity here, the person who's been doing so much work to bring the guidelines, up to date. And so thank you so much, Jenna, for all that work. I know it's been a lot, but the whole field is really benefiting from that update.
Thank you. It definitely has been a community effort for sure. I'm certainly not a celebrity, but thank you.
You are, Jenna. Don't be shy. Don't be modest. And then we also have my really good colleague here. Well, they're all really good colleagues, but this one is one that I work with all of the time, and she's part of my team at CAST, our team. And so that's Amanda Bastoni. So Amanda, introduce yourself to the crowd.
Luis, it's so nice to be here with you and Jenna and Anne-Marie. Thank you so much for the awesome introduction. I'm Amanda Bastoni, calling in from a little tiny town called Polson, Montana. About 5,000 people here, and it's snowing like crazy. So it's fun to be in front of the fire and talking with all of you. And at CAST, I am the Senior Director of Higher Education and Workforce Implementation. And what that means is I think a lot about how we can support learners at all ages to make meaningful careers or engage in meaningful career learning.
And Amanda is such a great exemplar. I've learned so much from her in terms of implementing UDL in a really authentic way. And so I'm really excited to have her here. And then we also have Anne-Marie with us. So Anne-Marie, why don't you tell the people what you do at CAST?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Luis, again, for having us. We're really excited to share the work we've been doing. As I said, my name is Anne-Marie Knokey. I'm a Senior Research Associate at CAST. My work here has mainly focused on the co-design and research of CAST digital tools that embed universal design for learning. So really focusing on supporting learner variability and accessibility. So, and I live in California, so the weather here is not raining. It is sunny and beautiful and in the 70s. So sorry, Amanda, you're getting all the snow.
But you know what? Amanda said that if it's gonna snow, you might as well be in front of a nice cozy fire. So I am kind of envious of that, Amanda. So what else? And we have people from all over the country represented on this podcast. I'm joining everybody from Florida, where we have a cold front, y'all, coming through.
Uh-oh.
Don't get alarmed. A cold front for us is high of 55, a low of 50. So something like that. It's not a big deal. But what are you looking forward to this spring? Spring is a time of not only does the weather change, the seasons change, but it's also a time of renewal. So what are you looking forward to?
Oh, sure, Luis. And I think, Jenna, you're calling in from Massachusetts. Is that right?
That's right. Yep. I'm just north of Boston. And finally, we have some melting happening. We have had so much snow and ice this winter. So I would say that's definitely something I'm looking forward to, is all of the snow melting and finally having some nice warm weather to enjoy.
That's awesome. And I think my colleagues know, but I'm checking a bucket list item off of my life bucket list, and I have a wild mare, a horse, a filly actually, in my backyard, and I am working on training her. So my excitement for the spring will be that I'll be able to put a halter on her and take her for walks. So that's what I'm looking forward to this spring, Luis.
And Amanda, are you using UDL principles with your horse?
I am very much. Actually, I'm using UDL principles training my husband to train my horse. So I think that's where it's really happening.
UDL principles for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and get started with our conversation today because we want to talk about a very important project and one that we're very, very excited to be able to work on at CAST. And so I'm going to turn it over to Anne-Marie to tell us a little bit about the goals and the purpose of this project, starting with a brief description of what it is.
Yeah, so I'm super excited to share our new project that's supported by, excuse me, supported by the Gates Foundation. It's called Accessibility by Design, Reimagining Assessments with Universal Design for Learning. So overall, for the purpose of this project, we're really advising K-12 education partners on how to embed universal design for learning principles and accessibility features and assessments. We have a very, very, very supportive community of practice, which we're excited to work with. And we're providing hands-on help, such as needs assessments, coaching, inclusive design guidance. We're working with some designers and developers from our great partners at Khan Academy, Achievement Network, Carnegie Learning, and New Meridian to make sure every tool, including digital assessments, is built with all learners in mind. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about all learners and not just a few learners. So as part of the work that CAST is doing, we're exploring technologies such as AI and can be leveraged responsibly. We're really wanting to make sure that we're being responsible in this new era so we can expand access, reduce barriers, and make assessments more meaningful for every learner. The podcast today that we're going to be highlighting, our focus group work that we've been working on for the past few months, exploring perspectives on accessibility in UDL. So that's kind of just the overall purpose of the project.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that description, Anne-Marie. And Amanda, I'm going to put you on the spot because I know you do a lot of work around assessment, as all of us do. But why is assessment so important when you think about UDL?
Yeah, I think, Luis, when we're considering UDL, we really want to make sure that we're not including any barriers at all, but more importantly, when we're designing assessments, not unintentionally even including some barriers. So, we have this idea in mind that we want to test a construct or have learners understand a construct in learning, which is just an idea or concept in learning. But the way that we create that assessment can really actually impede our understanding of what the learners know. And I think about this all the time. I hate to, create stereotypes, but I'm not the world's best driver. I'll just say that right now. I am, but I passed the written portion of the driver's test easily, quickly, right? The testing was not an issue for me. That doesn't mean you necessarily want to ride in the car with me, right? So I think this idea is we need to be intentional about how we're designing our assessments so that they really tell us what the learner actually knows and allow the learner to really show what they know.
Absolutely. And Amanda, don't feel bad. I'm not the world's best driver. and that's a bad joke on my part, but I can't drive at all because I'm visually impaired. But that's not true. I can take a Waymo, right? And now we have different options that are coming online. And so maybe I'm not driving the car, but I'm accomplishing the goal, right? Which is to get to point A to point B safely. And so I think that could be a metaphor, right? About we often use the GPS as well, like having a challenging goal, right? A goal that really is meaningful, and then providing different options for how you get there. I also look at assessment as like closing the loop. Right? So if instruction is accessible in terms of our methods and our materials and our goals are clear, then we got to close the loop with assessment, right? And understand that people learn. And if they didn't learn, then where is the barrier that's keeping them from learning? And so that's part of this project, right? Is finding out how can we make assessments that work better for everybody. And as Anne-Marie said, we're also doing some research alongside with the coaching and the other parts of this project. So Jenna, I'm going to turn to you to tell us a little bit about the focus groups that you and Amanda and others have conducted. So tell us a little bit about why you selected this approach, who was involved, and more specifically, how you incorporated UDL into that focus group approach. Because this is really important, right? It's about making research more inclusive. Just like with assessment, how inclusive the assessment is will tell us a lot, right? About who was able to learn or not. Well, the same thing with research. Who we include matters, right? And so we want to make sure that we include all of the voices. So tell us a little bit about that.
I love how you framed that, Luis, really thinking about who we include matters. And that was something we were thinking a lot about as we designed the research component of this study. And when we started our project, we had the goal of learning from the experiences and perspectives of district leaders. So we were thinking about leaders who were in charge of purchasing assistive technologies and who were supporting accessibility in their schools and districts. And then we also wanted to be sure we were learning from the experiences and perspectives of individuals who use assistive technologies. And this could be a range of AT, including screen readers, augmentative and alternative communication devices, AAC devices, speech-to-text, and lots of other kinds of AT. And so when we were designing the study, one way to learn from these participants' experiences and perspectives would be to conduct focus groups. That was kind of a natural instinct we had in terms of our research methods. And focus groups are a qualitative research method for collecting data. And a traditional approach to a focus group would be to gather together a small group of participants and then have a conversation through oral language. However, being researchers at CAST, of course, we were bringing a UDL lens to this work, and kind of thinking about this traditional approach to focus groups really helped us to uncover some barriers through that UDL lens. And from an engagement perspective, we were realizing and kind of thinking about how sometimes it can feel really intimidating to share your ideas in a focus group, especially if it's made up of participants who maybe you're just meeting for the very first time. And it might also feel uncomfortable not to know the specific questions that might be asked of you, or be able to prepare to respond to those questions in ways that would make you feel more confident. And then we were thinking from a representation perspective as well. And traditionally, focus groups have been held using oral language. So all of the questions that are posed during the focus group by the researcher would be stated out loud for participants. And then from an action and expression perspective, there's, again, typically just one way for participants to respond, and that would be through oral language. So as a team, we really challenged ourselves to bring this UDL lens to the design of our data collection methods for this portion of the project, and be thinking about how can we be reducing these barriers and increasing access for participants in our study. We knew we had so much to learn from participants, and we really wanted to be thoughtful in terms of expanding options for them to fully engage and fully participate in this work.
That is beautiful.
Yeah, it might not come as a surprise to you what our next step was, Luis. But of course, we looked to the UDL guidelines.
Tell me, surprise me.
Yes, we went to the guidelines as our tool and our guide to really be thinking about how we could start embedding some options. And luckily, all of the data collection methods that we were using were all virtual. So we also had kind of some added flexibility given kind of that virtual approach. But we drew from really specific guidelines to think about how we might reimagine this more kind of traditional format of the focus group. So in terms of options for engagement, we were able to offer a choice in format. So for all of our participants who are generous enough to sign up to be a part of this study, they could choose to participate in a focus group. So this would be with 3 to 5 participants, an individual interview, or we created what we were referring to as a home-based document. And this was a document with all of the questions that we wanted to explore, and participants could respond to those questions right in the document by adding text or images or audio or video. We kept it really flexible so that participants could kind of respond in the document in the ways that best met their needs. And we felt like having these options were especially important for some participants so that they could be sure that they were choosing that format that felt most comfortable to them. And we also sent out our questions ahead of time. So that was another kind of option for engagement so that participants could have the chance to preview the questions and prepare in the ways that they might want to prepare in.
Fantastic. What a
Yeah.
great description. And what comes to mind to me in terms of the words that are in my mind right now, flexibility, options, making sure participation, right? So in some ways, like I said, with assessment, you were closing the loop on the research and the evaluation, right? Because often those parts don't get addressed in when we do the research and the evaluation of a project. So thank you for sharing that, and hopefully those of you listening to this, you're getting some ideas for when you plan a research study, that you make it more inclusive, so that again you're getting information from as many people as possible, and the research is really authentic, right? That's probably something that you found, Jenna, right? That it added an air of authenticity when people could participate in the ways that made the most sense to them.
Absolutely. And using the guidelines as a guide to really help us figure out those authentic ways of participating was so helpful. And we shared some of those options for engagement, but we did the very same thing for representation in terms of making sure that we were representing our questions in lots of ways. So we were sharing them orally, we were typing them in the chat. Then in terms of action and expression, that choice of format was so helpful in terms of engagement, but it was also so helpful in being sure that participants could choose the option that allowed them to fully communicate their ideas. So we just were really glad to kind of be able to use the guidelines as a lens to make sure that we were able to learn from participants and really make the most of their generosity with being a part of the study.
You know, and Jenna and Luis, if our going back to Luis's example of the Waymo, our goal was to learn about AT as much as we could, learn about the use of assistive technology in school and to support the design of ed tech. You know, if that's our goal, right, that the assessment then it's really open. They can take the Waymo, they can drive themselves, right? Like the examples that Jen is giving. We just tried to provide a lot of ways for people to share what they knew about that topic, right? How they got there didn't matter, but they had really important information to share with us.
Absolutely. All these methods really illustrate those concepts of opening up research to more people and making it more inclusive. So you did all these things. What did you find? What were some of the key themes and patterns that came out of your focus groups and the other methods of participation? So Amanda, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, first I'll tell you about some overarching themes, and then later on I'm going to share a couple of tangible, like 5 tangible strategies, Luis. But overarching themes, like Jenna said, we were really intentionally trying to model UDL in the way we conducted and gathered the research, right? And so like a sub-second question, not just to learn about the use of assistive technology and how we could better integrate assistive technology into the design of ed tech and into our design of assessments, but we really hoped that we could see if or how UDL was useful in designing and gathering that research. And so one of the clearest outcomes was that the way participation was structured, it really mattered. It had an impact. So we designed the research processes, like Jenna said, to include choice, include lots of people. We provided early access to the materials. We had intentionally flexible pacing, right? People could respond in multiple ways, and respondents told us that this made the experience better for them. One participant said, and this is a quote from the study, "It was my first time and it was very accessible and easy to participate." And another said, "I feel like this study experience removed any barriers I would have had." So that was like awesome. But then we also found that participants had more autonomy and voice. When we did these UDL moves or UDL considerations, when we embedded those into the way we designed the research, the data got richer. So a participant explained it this way: you allowed me to express myself. The questions were open-ended enough so that even though I strayed from the exact question, that didn't get in the way of giving you the information that you needed. And we found, now we'll come to this in the end, Luis, when we talk about, the strengths and maybe considerations for this approach, but we found that this flexibility did not dilute the research. For us, it really led to deeper, more reflective conversations and richer engagement, deeper engagement, which we thought improved the participant experience and then strengthened the quality of the data.
Perfect. That's great. And so and I'll open this up to anybody who wants to respond. What benefits did you see from using this more UDL-informed approach for collecting data in terms of the organizations that we're working with and the way that they might design their assessments in the future, right? Because that was the goal of this research, is to inform how assessments might be designed in a way that's more inclusive. So what benefits did you see from taking this approach?
I'll jump in and say, I think for me, one of the most exciting benefits is that we really were able to expand participation. And as Amanda was mentioning, we had some participants share that they would not have been able to engage in this process without the options that we embedded. So to us, that just felt so important, that our findings are representative of more and more voices, and we can continue to iterate on this design too, that this is really just the start for us in terms of bringing a UDL lens to our research process. And we know we can keep working to continue to reduce those barriers and increase access. But ultimately, just knowing we were able to expand that participation, I think makes our findings that much more meaningful.
Absolutely.
I'd also like to just point out too that I think the way that we did this data collection is like we allowed individuals to share their true experience because we provided different formats. And so some people felt more comfortable verbally expressing or putting in the chat or writing it out. And so I felt like this gave us a truer experience and also maybe deeper stories. People shared lots and lots of stories. And I think providing these options helped with that. And people were just really excited to be part of the focus group and felt included, which is great.
Yeah, and
That-
Luis,
that- that's not
go ahead.
something you typically hear, right? People being excited about being part of a data collection activity. So that alone is a big win, right? If people want to share their experience, and we're talking about people's lived experience here, right? And that's not always easy to share. So anything we can do to make the process easier, I think helps. And then the other thing that came to mind as you were all talking is this idea that often we're confronted with in education about rigor.
Yeah.
Right? Like, oh, is this rigorous or not? And we're just here to say that, like, it's just as rigorous as any other process, and in some ways even more so, right? You probably back me up on that, Amanda, but you definitely get a deeper level of engagement, a deeper level of participation, right? And then when it comes to learning, a deeper form of learning. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, Amanda.
Yeah, Luis, as far as engagement, every participant said to us afterwards, we would like to stay in touch. We want to hear how you use this research. If you need us to member check and give you our thoughts and feedback, please reach out to us. So every single participant wanted to engage more. So I think that in itself is a total win. And when you think about assessments, that's one of the barriers, is getting learners to engage in those authentic assessments. So the way we designed this data collection was very authentic for the people participating, and they wanted to engage in it. And maybe I'll just give you, Luis, as like a kind of takeaway, like 3 recommendations we have.
Please, we love practical recommendations. So
And I think these could be for researchers or people designing assessments. Like, we could kind of, parse this out afterwards. But we had these recommendations, which was provide advanced access to the materials and questions. It seems so simple, but let students know what they're going to be assessed on up front, right? Early on. What's the design of the assessment going to be look like? What's the topic going to be? We don't need to hide that, right? And when we shared the research questions and materials ahead of time, participants had reduced anxiety. And they said that it helped them feel like they could participate. Some of them got their questions ready in advance even. And they said things like, having the materials ahead of time allowed me to collect my thoughts and feel that I would be able to contribute something meaningful, right? Mm. And then another participant said, I process things slowly, so it's helpful for me to sort things out on paper before I try to articulate it. So that can definitely be transferred into assessments. Here's what the end goal is going to look like. Here's where we're going, right? And then another thing that we can think about for a piece of advice is build flexibility into the pacing and participation. So you talked about this, Luis, and I think, Jenna, that was something we noticed, right? We could have even done this more intentionally. But we we would encourage people to think about being flexible with the pacing. And so participants said things like, without the flexibility, I likely wouldn't have been able to participate at all. And in that case, they're talking about being able to schedule a one-on-one interview versus attend that, shared time for the focus group. And then another person said the flexibility allowed me to collect my thoughts, listen to others, and respond in a way that felt natural to my communication style. And in that case, they're talking about the home base. So that document Jenna talked about, so they could listen, reflect, and respond in the home base while other people were talking. I have one more tangible strategy, but Jenna, did you want to talk about like the pacing thing? Because we kind of hit on that a little bit together in reflection.
Yeah, I think that's something as a team we're really excited to dig into a little bit more, like thinking about that notion of time as a potential barrier and more fully designing for the idea of temporal accessibility. And I think when we first went into this, we were kind of thinking, well, if we, design the focus group to be around 60 minutes, the interview to be around 30 or 45 minutes, and then the home base kind of gives you unlimited time, then there are some options in terms of the amount of time participants will have to share their ideas, and also in terms of the time commitment that participants are willing to share with us by participating. But we found in some interviews and focus groups, like we were just running out of time. And, sometimes we needed more time to follow through with a line of thought that maybe we weren't quite anticipating, and we really wanted to explore that. Sometimes participants needed more time to fully express their ideas. And I think that idea of listening and patience too, patience in terms of giving participants the time that they need to fully respond is so essential. And we're still kind of trying to experiment and figure out with how do we design for a particular amount of time for a focus group or an interview and still really honor that idea of patience and flexibility and, pacing. So those are things I think we're still excited to continue to learn about. And we know that the participants who have engaged in this study already are giving us good feedback, and I'm sure we'll continue to learn from feedback.
Always
Yeah,
great.
Jenna.
Yeah. Always great to learn from feedback, right, Amanda?
Yeah, it sure is. One of the things, Luis, is that when we coded this, so we brought this all into Max QDA, and Anne-Marie and I have been thinking about the themes along with Jenna. We've been brainstorming together, going through the codes. But one of the codes, and this is just internal, but it was like feeling valued. Mm-hmm. This came up so much in the responses. People would say things like, it wasn't even so much about the time to respond, but being able to respond in a way that worked for them, left them feeling valued. And I feel like that came up so frequently. And how can we make sure that when we design assessments, they honor the different ways that people can respond, and they also feel valuable to the learners, right? And I just think that's like an important, I don't know, it's just a concept that's floating around in my mind. And maybe the last thing I'll say is, the kind of last tangible, Luis, was really inviting people to stay in contact with us. So we had a question at the end that said, invite participants to remain engaged. How often have I taken a quiz or a test or turned in an essay, and that's like the only time I get feedback, right. or I don't get any feedback, and I worked really hard on it. It was a big part of my experience. So just making sure that when we design assessments, there's ways for learners to re-engage or stay engaged, like if they got it wrong or if they even got it right, like what did they get right? Like where is that feedback? So our participants said things like, I look forward to seeing the final product. Another participant said, how do we help? I want to help. I want to be involved, So I don't know. I think if you're designing assessments really well, you're sharing the assessment up front. You're making a lot of flexibility along the way. And then you're giving learners ways to continue to learn about how after they completed that assessment.
Yeah, and I think for both assessment and research, right, because we're talking about two related things here, that idea of being valued is really important, especially for our marginalized communities, right? That when it comes to research, they've always been approached as subjects right?
Yeah.
People whose data, whose experiences we're going to take and do something with, as opposed to people that we're going to engage with and really help them through the research process, kind of process their own feelings, process their own thoughts, their own insights. And instead of like extracting information from them, put them in a position where they're contributing, right?
Yeah.
Which is a different frame of mind. And that's when you really feel value. Like you're contributing to knowledge making, to knowledge building, as opposed to just, oh, we're going to do an interview and we're going to sit down with you for a half hour and we're going to extract this information from you and you'll never
Yeah.
see it again.
Yeah. Or we're not even going to design it so you can participate. Like there's some, there was some of our participants who said, if I didn't have an access to the home base, I wouldn't have been able to participate.
Right.
So if we had only designed this as like a verbally responsive focus group, we would just
Right.
have left people out, period.
And there's many times when I've been interviewed and like the moment the phone clicks and we're done, I'm like, oh, I wish I had said that. That was so important, right? Has that ever happened to any of you?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We left, and Luis, we left the home base open for a
Exactly.
week afterwards so that people could still add their ideas.
So you're getting a more accurate representation if you give those options for like, oh, the home base is open. I can go back in, and that thought that just clicked after we ended the formal focus group. Now I can go back in and contribute that information, right? And so you're getting a more accurate representation. I would say a more rigorous representation.
Yes.
I'm bringing that word back in here.
I would totally agree with you. Now, Jenna, Jenna talked about time. Do you think it's okay? I just want to say one thing we did think about though, Luis, is, we did have to make some changes to what we originally thought the design was going to look like. Like we learned that the focus group did allow people to learn from each other, right? Like, so one of the comments in the focus group was like, I loved hearing from my colleagues. I took that away. Whereas the home base, we felt like allowed for much deeper personalized stories to come out because people could really write and process, as you said earlier.
Right.
So like our advice is just maybe like be intentional about,
Always.
how you design your research gathering strategies, right? Do you want relationship building? Do you want personal stories? Maybe if you want relationship building, but you also want personal stories, you create a shared home base. There's like ways to do this, but just thinking that there are, considerations to make.
Well, and Jenna, that idea of temporal accessibility, it's something that I'm glad that you introduced me to as another aspect that we don't consider always, but can be a significant barrier, right? When we don't think about the passing of time as being a challenge. And I've taken so much from being part of this project myself. Like now, I just did an interview yesterday, and I share the questions ahead of time.
It's awesome.
And I left them open after the interview, right? And
Great.
what I found is that we could then focus on having a so much more richer conversation during the time together, right? As we dug deeper into themes and so on that came up. So really appreciate being part of this work with you all. So in wrapping up, as we come on the end of our time together, what are some final from each of you? What's like a final lesson or thought that you want to leave people with? How about we start with Jenna and then we go around?
I think what's on my mind right now is that this is an iterative process. So we really are experimenting right now with the kinds of options and supports we can build in to the data collection process. Now, as we're moving into data analysis, we're thinking about like, how can we bring that same UDL lens to our analytic strategy? And Amanda mentioned that participants want to see some of our findings. So we'll be able to engage in that member checking process. And we can think about how might we share those initial findings in an accessible way and make sure that the participants can share their feedback to us in an accessible way. And then even thinking about moving ahead to disseminating our findings and sharing our findings, and how are we making sure that we're doing that in a way that can reach lots of different people who are interested in our work, and thinking about the accessibility of our formats as we're disseminating. So it just feels really exciting to think we really can be bringing this UDL lens to every component of the research process. And I'm also just really looking forward to other researchers who are engaging in this work. Luis, I know you've been thinking a lot about designing accessible surveys. We're reaching out to other researchers outside of CAST who are engaged in this work of really thinking carefully about how we're dismantling these barriers that have been in place for so long and thinking about how we're expanding participation and expanding engagement in the research process. So to me, this feels exciting. It's kind of like just the beginning, and we know we have so much more to learn.
Absolutely. And it's going to be an iterative process, right? We're going to learn, and then we're going to implement, and then we're going to learn some more. So this is really exciting. How about you, Anne-Marie? What would be one final thought?
Yeah, I just want to send out an appreciation for all the participants who participated in the focus groups. We really appreciated their time, their thoughts, and we enjoyed getting to know them and learn from their experience. So we're very thankful.
Absolutely. That's really, we're there to facilitate these conversations, but they're really the people that know their experiences best. And we're just giving them an avenue to be able to share authentically what their experiences with assessments have been so that we can then design better assessments for the future, more authentic assessments, if you will. How about you, Amanda?
Yeah, I second everything that you've all said, and I think about the courage it takes for these participants who shared some, really honest stories of feeling excluded in their youth and in their learning experiences. And man, that is not easy to share, and I just feel so grateful that they were able to share it with us. I think drilling down, I'm excited to learn a little more about the home base, because in the feedback, people said stuff like the home base was a game changer. Or they said things like, if I felt more relaxed, it was easier than I expected because I had somewhere I could share my notes or share my thoughts. So I kind of want to dig into how do these technologies, like a shared Google document seems like such a low lift, but it's had such a big impact. So why is that, and how can we leverage that more?
Absolutely. So lots of learning to come. And as Jenna mentioned, as we apply these approaches to different stages of the research process so that, again, we can close the loop on from data collection to data analysis to dissemination, right? All these are important elements of making sure that we do something that we're really passionate about at CAST, which is closing that research to practice and practice to research loop, right? Because that's really when we have an impact, is when people take our findings and they apply them, and it has a real life impact on the experiences of learners, which includes their experiences with assessment, right? Because assessments is one of the areas of learning that cause the most anxiety. I'm speaking personally here as somebody with test anxiety, right? So everything that we can do to make the assessment experience better and apply these insights, I think will really yield some dividends for everybody. So thank you very much. I want to thank you again, Jenna, Amanda, Anne-Marie. I get the pleasure of working with you all on daily or weekly basis, but not everybody else does. So we're hoping that we've exposed you to these amazing people through this podcast, and then you'll go to the CAST website and check them out. Check out their work, and then we'll also try to drop some information into the show notes. So that you can learn more about the project, the goals, and so on, and just keep in touch with the research that we're doing and the approach to that research, right? That is having a significant impact on inclusion and on participation. Thank you again, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, Luis.
So much. This was a fun conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Learning Experience Podcast. We are so glad you're a part of this conversation.
And if you're like me and today's episode sparked some ideas or got your brain flowing, well, just remember, there's so much more to explore out there.
And remember that CAST is leading the way when it comes to accessibility, workforce innovation, professional development, and research.
So visit cast.org to dive deeper. That's CAST.org, and keep learning with us.